Women are human too. Carrying and bearing a child is not the only function a woman has, and the typical stereotype woman is far from in the past. I said, conceiving and giving birth to a child is not the only thing a woman can do. And I just stopped by here to serve notice that women are human too.
You know, one of the greatest hymns that was ever written was one called Great is Thy Faithfulness. Didn't know how much it would mean to me until I became an older lady trying to do what I do, being a mother, being a wife, being a Christian, being who I am. But it really became very personal to me when I look back over my life and how faithful God has been to me. When I was a young lady, somewhere around 14 years old, I lived in an area that was considered kind of bad. It was one of those areas where we lived in a home that from the outside looking in, or from the outside period, you would have thought, oh, they have it going on. The house is so pretty, it's so large. 3-story red brick house, huge yard front and back. My mom had 7 kids. She was married to my stepfather. But what folk didn't know that what was going on the inside. They didn't see what was happening. And what was happening on the inside was what kind of made me who I am today. I learned about domestic violence on the inside of the red brick house that looked so great from the outside. I learned about living in abject poverty in a 3-story red brick house that looked so great from the outside. Inside the house, there was an area where we lived, all of us, all 7 children and my mom. My stepfather would come and go. But we lived in 2 rooms in this 3-story red brick house because he had decided that he wanted to redecorate the house. And what he did was he had us all 7 kids, take sledgehammers to the walls, and we were to pull out all the paneling because he was going to put up new paneling. He was going to put in new areas of insulation, and it was going to be so beautiful. But what happened instead was we tore down the walls and we never put anything back up. And in Louisville, Kentucky, it gets cold, particularly during the fall and winter time. And when you live in a red brick home where the insulation keeps it cool in the summer and warm during the winter, and there's no insulation, it does just the opposite. It became so cold that we ended up sleeping in 2 rooms, the living room of the home and the room next to it, which would have been the formal dining room, because all the other rooms literally had the walls torn out from the out. But again, on the outside, if you were to see the home, oh, it looks so beautiful. So we're sleeping on the floor. We're all 7 of us, my mom in the corner, and we're learning what it's like to not have money, to not have food, to not have the things that we needed. We had love for each other though, but there was a lot of stuff that we didn't have. But great is his faithfulness to me.
My name is Erin Jones. I am black and white. I'm American and I'm European. I'm an athlete and I'm an academic. I have experienced brokenness and I've experienced healing, and this is my story. This year I'm 42 years old. If we back up 42 years, I was born the product of an affair between a 60-something-year-old black man and a 20-something-year-old Norwegian woman, probably a white woman, in the United States, in Minnesota, of all places. And that was a challenge, I'm sure, back in 1971 when I was born. And so I was given away to the Children's Home Society immediately at birth. I don't know anything about my parents. I know my mother was 5'9", my father was 5'7". I'm 6 feet tall somehow. That's really all I know about my family. What's most important, though, is not that I was rejected by my biological parents, but that in 1971, 6 months after I was born, I was adopted by the Adamson family. The Adamsons are Scandinavian. My mother comes from a Finnish background, my father from a Norwegian background, and despite probably the wishes of their families, they decided to adopt brown children. Their first intention was to adopt Native American children, but the tribes in that region wouldn't allow them to adopt, and so they went for the next group of kids that no one wanted. And that was anyone who had any African American in them. And much like today, black children or kids with any amount of black in them in Minnesota don't get adopted out. They stay in foster care for most of their lives. And I was one of the fortunate ones, and I was chosen to be adopted by this family. And that's a special thing for me. And so I don't cry about not being with my biological parents. I celebrate that I have an amazing, amazing family. But it was not easy for my parents. I can only imagine in the 1970s, I think most people in the United States think of the civil rights movement as being a movement that crossed the entire nation. But it really took place in the South and a little bit of the East Coast. And so Minnesota was not really ready for our family. So here you have 2 white parents and a black child. And then when I was 3 years old, they decided it was time to adopt another black child. And so they adopted a little boy when I turned 4. And so we doubled the black population in our little town. And there we were, 2 crazy-haired kids. People didn't quite know what to do with our skin color. They definitely didn't know what to do with my hair or either one of our hair. I have pictures of my hair, and it's as big as my body when I was 2 and 3 years old. And my mom didn't really know how to take care of it either. They had not had any experience with cutting black hair. There were no black hairstylists anywhere, and so my parents did the best they could. And my dad was a math teacher. My mom decided to stay home with us, and so we lived this life in Stillwater, Minnesota that was very abnormal at the time.
We were not placed here just for mating, not placed just to conceive. We were not placed here just to produce. We are far from factories. We did not come into this world as a punching bag, and we do not intend to go out as one. You can no longer tie us to a whipping post, tied up just for fun.
Because of the way the house looked on the outside, I was able to make great friends and get boyfriends for some reason. Now, gratefully enough, they never came into the home, but they met outside. We would meet outside, and one young man said to my mom one day, "I'd like to take your daughter out." I was 15 years old, and so I said, "Sure, I'd love to go out with you," and my mom gave permission. I felt so grown because this was a 21-year-old man who wanted to take me out. And we go. It's raining in Louisville that day. It's a Sunday, and it's after church. He says, "Listen, I need to go by my home, and because I just got off work, I need to go by my home, and I need to take a shower, and then we'll go out." I said, "Okay, cool." But I'm 15. It's my very first date as an adult. A lot of things I didn't know. I'm a virgin. A lot of things I did not know. And one of them was that probably I should not have been left in the car while he's inside getting himself together. But I sit and I wait. And I'm just thinking, oh, this is going to be great. And he comes back out in the rain, and Then he tells me a story about how he had gotten paid, but he was unable to cash his check. And back then, there were no check cashing places on Sundays. Matter of fact, there were no places open on Sunday except maybe a grocery store. There was no 24-hour. All the stuff that we have today, we definitely did not have it back then in the 70s. And so he says, I want to take you somewhere else. So he drives me to a park. It's 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and it's dark, and it's raining, and he takes me to an area where no one could see where this car was, very isolated, very off the beaten path. And he tells me that if I want to be his lady, that I'm going to have to be his lady. He also then tells me that I need to understand that whatever happens, if I tell anybody about it, that I'm going to reap, if you will, what I sow. He opens up his glove compartment and he pulls out his gun and he shows it to me and he says, I won't kill you, because if I really need to, I'll get my sisters to do that. And so he tells me to get in the back seat of the car, and he rapes me. Stop for a minute, please. Phew. Okay. I had always wanted to be that woman that would give myself the first time to my husband, whoever he was going to be. I have been raised that way. More or less because I actually did not ever want to be unmarried when I was around all these other folk who were popping up pregnant all the time and thinking it was okay. I did not want to be one of them people. I wanted to be someone who mattered to myself. I had enough, dignity, enough self-respect to think I want to be married when I lose my virginity. And this gentleman, for lack of a better word, took that from me. I don't think he knew I was a virgin. Because once it was over, he started asking me, are you all right? Are you okay? I didn't know. And so I go home, and he takes me home, and I don't really talk much. I'm just so glad he didn't kill me. And in the car, while he's doing what he's doing to me, I'm just praying, God, get me out of this. Get me out of this. Get me out of this. Great is his faithfulness. I get home. My skirt is ruined. I tell my mother a truth. I don't tell her the truth. I tell her a truth. And a truth is that I had started my cycle. I was known for having irregular cycles all the time. You never knew when I was going to start or stop. So that was a truth in that she could understand. I did not want to say to her, he raped me, because I felt bad. I took it upon myself to feel bad that my mom had given permission for me to go on this date, and I was so happy. And I didn't want her to think I gave permission, and I did not want her to ever say, you can never go out again. I did not want her to feel guilt over it. I just wanted there to be peace. So when he called the next day, I never said anything to him other than no. We didn't have cell phones. We just had landlines. So when he called the house, it was like, no, I can't be bothered. Thank you, but no. And I think back on it now. I'm thanking him for asking me out again for something that he took from me. I did not know then, as I do now, that I could have said no, 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 no. I was afraid because of the gun. I was afraid because of the threat of the sisters. I was afraid because of all of that stuff. And I don't know where the strength came from to get through that. I remember speaking once at a women's conference, and I told them this story. And I told them that if the woman Robin today could go back to that Robin that was sitting in the backseat of that car, terrified out of her brain, this Robin would have said to her, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me through the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for he's with me. His rod and his staff, they comfort me, and he prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies. He anoints my head with oil, and my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy will follow you, Robin, all the days of your life. And when it comes time, you will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." So don't look at what you see now, baby. Just know goodness and mercy is coming. And your life is going to be so much better. That's what I would have told her if I could have heard me today, back then. But mercy did follow, and so did grace. I did live through. I didn't get pregnant. I didn't get an STD. And even though I wanted to die, I didn't die. I lived through all of that. I lived through all of that.
We too are Homo sapiens. We are humans just like you. And I just not can pass up this opportunity to say, women are human too. We are not placed here for you to constantly push. You resorted to violence and you continuously pulled. For your verbal expressions, they made us sneeze. For we are allergic to bull.
I remember there were 2 little Korean boys who were also adopted at a similar time, and really in the 1970s, being Korean and adopted was more acceptable than being biracial with Black and adopted. And I don't have a ton of memories of being a little girl, but I do remember always feeling different. I remember feeling like I never looked like anyone else around me. We never talked about race, but when you're 5, you don't really understand those things. What I do know, though, is at 5 years old, my dad came home from work one day and announced to our family, we're moving to the Netherlands. Of all the places in the world that we could move, why the Netherlands? When my father had applied for teaching jobs overseas, I think partly to allow us as a family to have an experience that was very different from the racialized experience in the United States. I think partly they were just curious about what was beyond the boundaries of the United States. And so at 5 years old, we found ourselves, my brother and I, moving to the Netherlands, thousands of miles away, across the country and then across an ocean, to the land of the giants. The Dutch people are the tallest people in the world, and I guess it's probably appropriate that I'm 6 feet tall now, but at the time they were just giant white people, and they spoke this very odd language, and it sounded like they were clearing their throats all the time. And I laugh about that now. It's not the language. It's not a love language, but I love it because I speak it now. And as a little child, you don't have to go take classes on how to speak a new language. You just learn by playing with other children. And so by 6 or 7, I was fairly fluent in Dutch just by playing with other little kids. But I was the only brown kid in our community. My brother and I were the only 2 brown kids. For the first time, that didn't matter. Nobody cared in Europe that we were this biracial family, this interracial family. Nobody cared. And it was a beautiful thing. My father was a teacher at the American International School. The name of it was the American School of The Hague, and it was the school that was founded by the International Peace Court, the United Nations Peace Court. And so we had the opportunity to attend one of the best schools in the entire world. So here I was, this once orphan, then adopted kind of odd child from an odd family, now in the presence of ambassadors' children, and having the opportunity to meet famous people. My most clear memories are of 4th grade when John Denver came to our school to do a concert, and he brought with him, I want to say the Shah's wife came with him, and so she was basically a princess. And I was chosen out of all the kids in my class. 4 of us were chosen to eat lunch with him and with the princess. And so here I am, this little black girl at 9 years old, meeting a superstar and a princess. And later that year, we had the opportunity to sing with Danny Kaye on television. And those were profound moments, although I don't know that I realized it at the time. It was normal to me. It was normal. This is just what life was like. But I think in the midst of that, something triggered in me to realize that no matter how odd my situation, I was no different than John Denver or Danny Kaye. Somehow I could be great like them, and maybe I would never be a famous singer, maybe I would never be a famous actor. I could never be a princess because I wasn't born into royalty, but something in me at 9 years old said, you know what, Erin, you can be great. And I remember going and asking my 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Parlier. I came back from this TV show with Danny Kaye and said to her, if I want to change the world, what do I do? What do I do to become great? Now, as a classroom teacher, I can only imagine how I would respond if a kid asked me that. I'm sure no one had ever asked her that before, but her response was this: I have a 50-page fractions packet for you. Why don't you do that? She just didn't know what to say to me. And so I remember it was winter break, and I took that 50-page fraction packet and I did it all. And I knew in my head, somehow the message I got from her was, you're going to have to work harder than everybody else if you want to be great. And so I began this journey at 9 years old. At 9, I actually wanted to single-handedly solve the Middle East crisis. And so I began to learn Arabic and Hebrew at lunchtime while all the other kids were playing outside. I was learning languages. And I had a friend from Israel and one from Libya. And I took lessons from them at lunchtime. And it was a powerful experience. Something in me knew if I wanted to change the world, I would have to speak the languages of the world. And so that began a journey for me. Today I speak 4 languages. And I knew as a young girl that if I was going to build bridges, I had to speak the language of the people. And so I began this journey, and then my friend left from Israel, and I didn't get to pursue that passion to learn Hebrew, but I never lost that love for language. And so my father, when I got to middle school, decided to teach in Switzerland every summer. In order to get us to Switzerland for free, he taught at a very exclusive camp. And so we had the opportunity as young kids to attend a camp with kids who were part of royal families in Saudi Arabia, a camp that was incredibly expensive, but we, like our school, got to go for free to this camp 6 weeks every summer. And the camp was a computer camp and a French camp, and I decided to take French lessons. And so I was fluent in French by the age of 12. And I knew that this was something I wanted to really develop and grow. We had opportunities as middle school kids to travel. I was an athlete, and we probably were in 5 countries by the time I was 11 years old. And that just continued for me, this passion of the international and thinking about changing the world on an international level. And so I began to get these ideas in my head of how I wanted to change the world. And then high school came, and the challenges of living in Europe really became, as a young person, there's no legal drinking age. You could literally at 14 years old walk into a marijuana bar and order hash off the walls like you would order a coffee here in the United States. And so what we think about as peer pressure in the United States is a much different issue when suddenly all of these things are legal. And I remember at 13, as I finished 8th grade, thinking to myself, if I want to change the world, I need to live a life that's very different from the young people around me. And so I wrote in my journal, I will never touch drugs, I will never smoke a cigarette, I will never drink alcohol. And that choice meant I'd be an outcast. Again, I'd be the outsider because it was so normal to drink and smoke. And I became one of the only athletes who didn't drink at all. And I talk to young people about that choice all the time. It meant socially that I was an outcast, but the benefits of that is I walked into high school as a varsity athlete. I made varsity teams my freshman year. And I tell young people today, it was because of that choice to live a life that was different. And I was determined to be the best at everything because I knew world changers had to live in a different way. And so I did. And then my sophomore year, my dad came to me and said, you really need to see the United States and see that it's a bigger place than Minnesota, which is the only place I'd ever been. And when I imagined the United States at 15, I imagined a bunch of white people because I'd only ever been to Minnesota. I'd met presidents at that time. I'd at least been in the presence of presidents and ambassadors, and everyone was white. And the White House, how much whiter could it be? And so I imagined coming back to the United States full of people who looked very different from me. Now, I had studied American history. I knew about slavery. That's about as far as we'd gotten in our history books. And so something in my head, even though I was a smart kid, didn't translate that these black people who had been slaves still lived in the United States somewhere. And so in my mind, it was my brother and I were the only blacks in America. I just had no context. And so at 15, I came back to the United States with my father and 9 other white students. And I'll never forget getting off the plane in Washington, D.C. And everyone got off in front of me somehow. I ended up at the back of the line. And I remember standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at the tarmac. And we had to walk down on the tarmac and then into the airport. And I remember standing at the top of the stairs and looking out at the tarmac and seeing hundreds of black faces scurrying around, and I could not find white people. Literally all the white people had gotten off my plane and gone inside the airport, and I found myself overwhelmed by what I was seeing, and I just began to sob. Here's this, superstar athlete, pretty independent, intelligent young lady sobbing at the top of the stairs. There were other people like me. For the first time, I realized I was not alone. And it was an incredibly emotional experience. My father came running back up the stairs and he thought I'd hurt myself. And so he came, honey, are you okay? Did you sprain your ankle? What happened? And I said, Dad, why did you never tell me there were other people like me? It's the first time I've ever seen my father cry. He's not a crier. I've probably seen him cry twice in my whole life. And that was a powerful moment. And he held onto me and we held each other and felt like for an eternity. But eventually he said, you know what? The kids went into the airport and I'm responsible for them. We probably should figure out where they are.
We were not placed here for you to get rid of when you felt that you were through. We were here to teach all stagnant men, women are human too. Now, gentlemen, this is not to say in any way, by far you are not needed. There are just certain styles in which one must compile to know how women should be treated.
One of the things that I did not talk about was the domestic violence. It was not every day. It wasn't something that I saw on a consistent basis, but it was something that I saw. I had determined in my life that I would never have anybody that would hit me. I didn't know what I was going to do. Whoever this person was that was going to come into my life, I didn't know what I was going to do to make sure he knew that no one could hit me after what I saw growing up. My mom gave my stepfather 7 children. The 7th one was born stillborn. But 6 living kids. I'm the oldest of all of these siblings. And we lived in this home, and whenever she tried to stand up for any of us, he thought it all right to knuckle up, slap her, pull out a gun, say the things that he would say to her. I think the bad part about it was that he was a minister. So going to church, he's up there preaching and talking about the Lord, and then come back and he'd be so mean. And one day I just couldn't take it anymore. I really couldn't take it because he was meaner to me as I was not his child than he was to his own children. He was mean to them too. He would put people on punishment for years. He would beat them and all this other kind of craziness. And he was the only one with a job at one point. he would buy food for himself and eat it in front of us, knowing that he had children that he needed to feed. If there was any food left from what he purchased, then it could be divvied out amongst us. But he made sure he ate, and he ate well. On a side note, for the longest time, I couldn't eat Kentucky Fried Chicken forever because that was some of the food that he always brought into the home. They used to have the barrel. Now they have the bucket. But the barrel had 21 pieces. And I promise you that that brother would eat at least 10 of those pieces all by himself for the rest to go to the rest of us as kids. Anyway, we're sitting and I'm watching how he would talk to my mom. And she stood up for herself as much as possible. My mother was no wilting flower, but he was a man. He had big hands, and he just thought that you weren't supposed to talk back, and he would hit. And I got very upset about that. And so one day I ran away. And I ran away to a friend's home, way across town, to an area where they would not be able to find me. I did call my mom to tell her I was okay, but I just could not take him hitting her and me watching it. So I stayed with this family. It ended up being for about 6 to 7 months, maybe a little bit longer. What was funny was I moved into this home with this family. I looked like their family. No, not blood kin at all, but I looked like the Wicks family. And they treated me so well. The mother of that home was the matriarch trust. She was in charge of everything. I talk about foster care because she did foster care to me. Even though it did not go through the courts, it did not go through any system. She would not accept money from anyone. She said, no, she needs to just stay here and let her get this out until she's able to go back home, until she's ready. But she treated me like her child. If I got in trouble, she spanked me. Trust, I got in trouble. She spent some time with me. There were things I just did not know how to accept. It was funny, later on in life, she told me how beautiful she thought I was and how great she thought I was and gifted and talented. And I just looked at her because I never had thought of myself as beautiful or anything like that. I'd never heard that from a woman before. My mom always told me she loved me, but I never had heard you're pretty. Even my mom had said at one point, you know, there's some things that you could do to get this, to do that, or get this together or whatever. But not this lady. She told me that I was great just as I was. And, but again, she didn't tell me that until I was a little older. I was with this woman from maybe 15 to almost my 16th birthday. And she made sure that I knew how to save money, how to dress myself appropriately, how to be the young woman I was supposed to be in terms of I had been singing for years and years, but there was a little bit of a wildness about me even in that she helped to just bring it down and calm it down. And she was and is amazing because she's still alive today. She's 88 years old and she lives in Louisville, Kentucky, and she still calls me her daughter. And she always tells me that when I think of my children, you are always part of that family. And she always says to me, baby, that when I die, I need you to come home and sing for me. Whoever says that, I need you to come and sing for me when I die. I told her I'm going to be sitting with the rest of the family crying like everybody else. No, you need to sing for me. She is a great, great lady. And Alice Marshall Wicks took care of me. She took care of me. She was wonderful. She is wonderful. I'm so grateful to God. That was one of those things where great is thy faithfulness, morning by morning, new mercies I see every time I needed something great. I didn't think I'd cry again, but every time I needed something great, God gave me somebody great. And in this case, he gave me AMW, Alice Marshall Wicks. When I went back home to my mom, when I graduated from high school, Alice Marshall Wicks was at my graduation. And she walked up to my mother and she says, "Our baby graduated today." When my mom passed away, she sat with me and took care of me when my mom, Jeanette, died. She's an amazing lady. Don't get me wrong. I had the best mother, and I'm not talking about Alice, I'm talking about Jeanette. I had the best mother in the world. There was just some things where she needed her village, and the village did not stand with her. Alice stepped in and became part of her village, even from afar. She just said, "I'll be there for you." And she was part of the village. So when Jeanette died, Alice continues to this day to say, "Robin, I'm not just praying for you, I'm praying with you. I love you and your husband and your children and your grandchildren. I'm so amazed at what God has done for you, and I'm so happy that He made you a part of our lives. You are my daughter, and I love you beyond life." She is one of the greatest. I will talk about my mom in a minute. But she's one of the greatest ladies that I've ever met. So here's to you, Alice Marshall Wicks, for what you did for me. And because of what you did, it fostered in my heart the thought that I needed to also be a foster mom. And like you, I took children in, my husband and I, but then we decided we would just go ahead and adopt them. So we adopted these 3 children, and they are part of the loves of our lives. They are ours. They are Hendersons. They are great. They will be great. They are amazing young people. And honestly, it's like they knew they were supposed to be a part of our family. They came in. My family is a group of singers. The 2 daughters that my husband and I had sing. I sing. My husband is a musician. We're singers and musicians. And these 3 kids, when they stepped into our home, we learned all of them could sing and sing well and play drums and do whatever. It was like they were meant for us. But you fostered that. You made it happen. So I pay tribute to you for your care. And because of your care, I was able to say, "Honey, let's do something. Let's bring in someone else." And he said, "Okay." And our life has been the greater because of these young people who are a part of our lives. They're crazy, they're funny, they're amazing, and we love them. You helped to foster that. I love you.
saying, Jesus, I surrender all, all to Thee, my blessed Savior. I surrender all. Anybody say that tonight to the Lord? Oh, I surrender all to Thee, oh Jesus. Yes, I surrender all, everything I have in Thee.
So we got down off that airplane and got our luggage and got onto a bus to head to the hotel. And this particular trip, we were going to spend a week in DC with another high school from the United States. And this particular high school who shared the experience with us happened to be an all-black school from North Carolina. And I felt like I was in heaven. I had left this very white community and suddenly come to America and found my people. I was so ecstatic. We got to the hotel and checked in, and I went to my room to find 2 black girls in my room already. And I'm so excited. I found my people. Oh my gosh, I've arrived. And I remember running into the bedroom, the hotel room, and running up to one of the girls and saying, "Hi, my name's Erin Adamson, and I'm from The Hague, the Netherlands." And she looked at me as if I had 3 heads and I'd gotten off some alien vessel. And she didn't even speak. She just stared at me for the longest time. And I knew that I had said something wrong, but I had no idea what I had just said to offend her. And finally, she and her friend began to talk. And they talked back and forth and back and forth. And I spoke English, Dutch, French, a little bit of Spanish, some German, Italian. I did not speak North Carolina. I could not understand a word these girls were saying at all. But I knew it was about me. I knew they were talking about me. And I knew it was not good. And but I didn't really understand what was happening. And so there I sat frozen in this hotel room, so excited to meet girls who looked like me, and yet realizing that somehow I wasn't like them. And somehow, again, I was an outsider. And having served in a high school and having taught middle school now in predominantly black communities, what I know now is these girls were saying, "This is the whitest black girl we've ever seen. And where's the Netherlands?" I knew they had no idea where the Netherlands was. And but at the time, I just felt like an outsider again. And here's the beauty of how God works. Those girls could have said, "She's not like us. We don't want to have anything to do with her." But instead, they said, "You know what? We're going to turn her into a black girl this week." And so they did my hair that night, and they had me on the ironing board, actually. So this is before flat irons, and they had me on the ironing board, and they were ironing my hair out. And it was the first time in my life I felt pretty at 15. I never even thought about the possibility that I could be pretty, because what I looked like did not match the pretty of all the girls in my high school. And it was the very first time at 15 years old that I felt like, you know what? Maybe I am pretty. And I cried in that mirror all night as I looked at myself, at this transformation of who Erin was. And the next day they took me to a mall during free time, and I was in heaven. They bought me black girl clothes, and we had a dance at the end of the week, and the big dance at the time was the electric slide, and they taught me the electric slide, and it was such a beautiful time, and I felt like I was part of this community. And then Saturday came, and their yellow school bus came. And they got on that yellow school bus, and they went back to North Carolina. And I knew at the time, this is before the internet, I knew I would never hear from any of them again. And I was going to have to get back on that plane and go back to my white private school and be so alone. I had never felt so alone in my entire life. And I remember thinking at 15 years old, oh my God, something has been ripped out of my soul. And so I had to get back on that airplane at the end of the trip with my white dad and my 9 white peers and fly the 9 hours back to Amsterdam airport, knowing that my mom, who'd been my best friend probably since I was 8 years old, was going to be there waiting for me. And she was going to want to hear about this amazing trip that I'd taken to the United States. And I had no idea what to tell my mom at 15. I had no idea how to tell her, I need more than you can give me. I didn't want her to think I didn't love her anymore, but I knew she couldn't give me everything I needed. And so we landed in Amsterdam at Schiphol Airport, and there she was, ready to hear about this exciting trip. And all I could say to her was, Mom, I'm so tired. I just want to sleep. Can we talk later? And I got in the car and I pretended like I was sleeping, and I cried the entire way home. And then I cried for the next 2 weeks. I would get home from baseball practice and do my homework and cry myself to sleep. And what I learned 3 years ago when my mom heard my story for the first time, she said, you know what, honey, I cried myself to sleep too. I didn't know how to reach you. I knew something had happened, but I didn't know what had happened, and I didn't know how to ask you. And then my parents did something that they are my heroes today, not just for this, but this is one of the ways they're my heroes. They decided to go to every American bookstore in the Netherlands, and they bought every book they could about by for Black people, every video they could find about by for Black people. And they brought me this box back. My mom brought it up to my room one Saturday, and she was crying. And she put the box on my bed, and she said, you know what, honey, I will commit to reading every book and watching every movie with you. And we'll learn together about your history. And I know that someday you're going to leave me. She knew in that moment. She knew what I needed, and she knew that I could not stay in Europe. She knew that I was destined to go back. And we cried, and we held each other. And that began an amazing journey between my Finnish mom, my very white mother. And if you see her, she's 5'2" maybe on a good day, and blonde. And we began this amazing journey studying my history. And I remember opening this book. It was I Have a Dream. It was a history book of the movement of African American folks in the United States. And the first picture we opened to was a Black man hanging from a tree. And I remember sitting on our IKEA couch and turning to my mother and saying, why do people hate because of skin color? I don't understand. And she turned back to me and said, why do you think we raised you in Europe? We couldn't understand either. And we held each other and we cried as we watched Eyes on the Prize, and we watched people being beaten and dogs attacking people, and we learned about my history. And I realized in that time that I wanted to be a world changer like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He became my next hero, and I knew that I wanted to be like him. I knew that I wanted to change the world somehow, fight for civil rights. I didn't know how I was going to do that, but I had this vision. And so as I entered my junior year of high school, I knew that if I was coming back to the United States, I was going to have to do it by getting a scholarship, because my parents were teachers and they didn't make a ton of money. And if I was going to come and go to the best school, because Dr. King had gone to the best school, I was going to need to do really well academically and really well athletically and try to get a scholarship. And so I took 10 AP classes, 10 advanced placement classes, basically the equivalent of college courses. And I was the captain and MVP of all 3 sports that I played. And I was determined I was going to get to America somehow. And my senior year came, and I was captain and MVP of all 3 sports. And I had this dream of playing Division I soccer. Actually, it was my big sport. And found out that the only way I could get a scholarship was to fly myself back to the United States and try out with the team. And my parents said, we don't have that kind of money. We're teachers. You're going to have to do it academically. You're going to have to figure it out. And so I worked so hard, and I ended up graduating number 2 in my class. And I did really well in the SAT, and I applied to, my number one school was Princeton University, and my second school was Bryn Mawr College, which is a sister school to Princeton, and I was determined I'm going to do the best school possible. And never forget the day they announced over the loudspeaker at school, Erin Adamson has been accepted at Princeton University. We were all so excited, and my parents were so proud. And then we got the financial aid paperwork. And all I can say now, based on what I know about colleges, is they never bothered to look at my financial aid forms. They looked at my name, and they looked at my high school. And they assumed I was a white girl, and I was rich. And they offered me a $1,000 a year scholarship to Princeton. With a 3.9 GPA, speaking 4 languages, MVP in 3 sports, $1,000. And I remember that day, my parents saying, it's not happening. We're really proud of you, but you're not going to Princeton. And then I got the paperwork back from Bryn Mawr College, and they offered me a pretty hefty grant scholarship. And so I made my decision. Bryn Mawr was in Philadelphia, and we had just gotten The Cosby Show. And The Cosby Show, of course, was set in Philadelphia, and I felt like this was destiny. You know, slavery, civil rights movement, Cosby Show. I was ready to live the Black experience like the Cosbys, and I got my hair cut like Claire Huxtable. I was ready to go. I wanted to be her. I wanted to be a big-time lawyer. And so I came back to the United States at 18 years old. And my mother flew with me on the plane. In August, I was coming back for soccer preseason, so I had to be at school a week ahead of time. And we got on this plane and landed really late at night. And I remember it was completely dark outside. They lost all of my luggage. So if you can imagine leaving everything you know in another continent and then landing without anything. I literally, all I had was what was in my purse. I didn't have a toothbrush. I didn't have deodorant. I had nothing. I was 18. I had a passport. That's about it. But I was so excited to be in Philadelphia that all of that didn't matter. And so we took this taxi cab out to Bryn Mawr, and the houses just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And of course, on the Bryn Mawr website, or on the packet of information we got, Bryn Mawr was in Philadelphia, but it's not actually in Philadelphia. It's in the very wealthy, old money community of Philadelphia, which is outside. And so the houses are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And finally, we end up in Bryn Mawr town, and my mom's sleeping now because we've been on planes and buses forever. And we get to campus, and the power is out. I mean, it's just one of those days. Like, everything has gone wrong that could possibly go wrong, but I'm so excited to be in America. I have arrived. And then my first day on campus. So that next morning, my mom stayed at a hotel, and I go into the dining hall to get breakfast the next morning. And everyone behind the counter serving food was Black. And I was so excited. Black people. I haven't seen Black people in so long. I'm so excited to be here. This is Philadelphia. All the women in the dining hall were white. And then all the people, and I didn't understand that because I'd never experienced it. I'd read about the history, but I hadn't experienced that before. And so I remember walking up to this woman. She was a larger Black woman. They called her Big Mama later, but all I just knew is it was the larger Black woman. And I walked up and went to shake her hand because in my culture in Europe, you say hello to everyone. And I was so excited to be around these other people who look like me. And I walked up to her and put out my hand, and she said, "Oh, you don't speak to us here." I said, "Excuse me? What do you mean?" She said, "We're the help. You students don't speak to us." And I said, "What do you mean?" I really did not understand. I didn't understand what she was trying to tell me. And she said, "Honey, let me put it to you this way. Don't talk to us or you will be in trouble."
You see, women sense men's idiosyncrasies. We know just what they are. We just function better when you're not holding the key and we lock behind the bars. You see, men have taken the concept of marriage and they have interpreted it all wrong. We are not livestock or property. Thus, we cannot be owned.
A little bit about myself. After all of that, I was born in 1964 in May on a Sunday, the Sunday after Mother's Day. So my mother should have felt great. She had a kid for Mother's Day. And plus her birthday was actually 10 days before my birthday anyway. So as it stands, I gave her, when I came, I was a birthday present and a Mother's Day present. Can't answer anything better than that. And as life went on, and as I did what I did, again, I was a young singer. I started singing when I was 5. I went to this little church, and I heard this guy singing because our neighbor had taken me, I should say, to her church when I was a little girl. And I heard this guy singing, and in my brain, I said, oh, I can do that. He sounded like Michael Jackson. His name was Nathan. Nathan was up singing, and I'm sitting in the audience, and everything that Nathan did up there on the stage, I did it in the audience. So whatever move he did vocally, I was doing it. And the lady next to me goes, oh, this baby could sing. Now, I didn't know that I could sing. I just knew I could do what he was doing. And later on, it became apparent that that was the gift that I had been given. I wanted to be the female Michael Jackson. I just knew I could do it. I was in love with Michael Jackson, but I wanted to be the female one, if you get what I'm saying. Anyway, as I grew up, I sang everywhere. I did a lot of things in terms of trying to get out of the home. I made sure that I was outside of my home all the time until my family moved into the projects, or if you will, the government housing at the other end of the city. When we stayed in this red brick home until we moved into the government house, because they had actually condemned the home while we were living in it. So they moved us into government housing. So we lived in a place called Cotter Homes in Louisville, Kentucky. And I spent my last 2 years there in terms of living in Louisville. When I graduated high school, let me go back. I ran track in high school. I played volleyball. I, of course, directed the school inspirational choir. I did a lot of music things, a lot of drama. I was into all of that. My school was one of those schools that allowed for the arts. And so we did a lot of artsy things. I left home, joined the Navy, did a lot of working out and running and keeping it together. Noticed, of course, even back then, that when I would have to do my PT, that I couldn't do it as well as I did in high school, but it was okay. Got married young. I was married at 19. Had my first 2 children. I did all these things. Went around as a Marine wife, because I married a Marine. Went around as Marine wife. First as his wife, and then, if you will, he became my husband when I started singing and speaking everywhere. And yet, as it would happen, last year, I'm singing, and I noticed that I couldn't catch my breath. When I would sing, I would have to sit down. Someone would have to bring me lots of water and a lot of tissues and things to help, because I was sweating so profusely. I honestly didn't think anything of it other than the fact that maybe I was gaining just a little bit too much weight and I needed to really get back into the calisthenics of it all. But as time went on, I had lost my job, but I went to school. And as I was going to school, I had decided I was going to park my car on one end of the school and walk to the other end where my classes were. That would get me the exercise I needed. And I would be able to get that stuff off that was causing me so many problems a few months before, when I was sweating so profusely, whatever. But when I would walk to the class, my chest was palpitating. I was sweating again profusely, nausea. All of these things were happening to me. And I didn't understand what was going on. So October 18th, which just happens to be my brother's birthday, who passed away a few years ago, I was sitting in our bedroom doing homework at the computer, heart palpitating, sweating profusely, and my heart starts hurting, and I start shaking. And as much as I tried, I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong with me. Honey, I need you to take me to the hospital. I think I'm having a heart attack. So we had gone through this a couple of times before, but this time was really, really different. I just knew this is it. And what I mean is, each time I had gone through that before, 2008, 2010, they kept sending me back saying, your heart is fine. They did the stress tests. Everything was cool. But this time, really, 2012, something was up. So we go. They do everything they can to see what was up with my heart again. Ma'am, your heart is fine. But we see a little bit of something on this MRI that we took. So we want you to come back in to take a CT scan, just so we can check it out. So I go back in. My husband and I, we celebrated our 29th wedding anniversary on November 20th. November 21st, I was in the hospital getting a CT scan on my chest. And come to find out that I had an abnormality in my heart. I was born with a birth defect. Now, I can't give you the correct name. I can tell you though, my right coronary artery was wedged between my aorta and my pulmonary artery, growing out of the left side of my heart. A birth defect. Again, I ran track in high school. I played volleyball. I sang all over the world. I married this Marine. That in itself should give somebody heart trouble. I did all these things. I had babies. I was traveling everywhere. And I'm born with a birth defect. So, ma'am, we found it. We need to make sure that it really is what we think it is. So we're going to have you come back in December, and we're going to do a heart catheter thing. And they did. They shot all this ink up into my chest. And true enough, that's what it was, this abnormality. So they called me in and said, ma'am, we're going to have to do open heart surgery. We need to do a bypass in order for your heart to work properly the way it needs to, because this artery is not in the right area. Now, the funny part about it was they called me in. I had 2 appointments on the same day. They called me in. The first appointment was supposed to have been them telling me that they need to do the surgery. And then the second appointment would have been them explaining to me how they were going to do the surgery. Well, lo and behold, they got them confused, and they sent me to the person who tells me, so ma'am, this is what we're going to do. We're going to crack your chest open, and we're going to take a little piece of your vein from your leg, and we're going to do this, that, and the other. I did not necessarily understand that I had to have surgery. They had said to me, we're going to tell you this, this, this. I thought it was something where they were going to say, you know, we don't have to do the surgery. We can go in laparoscopically and just remove it. No, he tells me they have to crack me open and remove this artery and do some stuff. And I'm sitting there just devastated and bawling. Are you kidding me? You didn't tell me I had to have it. Oh, you haven't had that appointment yet? No. I guess that was the next appointment, and it was. So I said to them, listen, okay, after you've made me cry and have terrified me, and after I had sat down with my family, family meetings, we said, well, what we will do is I will have the surgery January 22nd because I have 2 conferences I have to go to. And I need to be at those conferences. And the doctors were like, really? You're going to go to these conferences? I said, one of them I paid for and one of them they're paying me for. Yes, I need to go to conferences. And I went, came back over the Martin Luther King holiday, and I had open heart surgery.
Now, I know you're saying you told us what not to do, so where does one to go find what is accepted? Well, at this point, I must refer you to your Bible because it talks about what is accepted. You see, there is a beauty in becoming once. And the Bible, it makes more than sense. It's just equal treatment, and the treatment is the act of benevolence.
And I couldn't understand it. And all I wanted to do was connect to these people who look like me. And even though it was a women's college, the people behind the counter were male and female. There were young men there and women. And I was just in shock. I didn't know what to do. I was confused. And I remember getting my breakfast and going and sitting in the corner and crying. I feel alone. I don't understand what's happening. And I went out to practice that day. And of course, I don't have any of my stuff because my luggage has been lost. And just all these confusing thoughts going through my head. And my mom stayed for a week. And she would come eat dinner with me and take me shopping to get stuff. And then she went home, and I was literally alone in this country by myself. And within that first month, I remember a girl from the admissions office. She didn't work at the admissions office full time. She just was maybe a couple of hours a day. She said to me, you're only here because we have to have 10 of you. 10 of who? I wasn't used to thinking about myself in terms of my race. Oh, I should mention, my first day on campus after soccer practice, I had to go fill out some forms with my mom. We had to go register, and I'm sitting in line waiting to fill out forms, and we get to this piece of paper, and it says, identify your race. Well, I'd never had to think about race. In Europe, you don't ever have to. We don't even have this concept of race, or we didn't at the time. And so I remember it said very clearly, select only one box. And I'm standing next to my white mother. And I know that my biological mother is white and my biological father is black. And I remember, like yesterday, standing there frozen at that table, fighting back tears, trying to figure out what box do I choose. Because I don't want my mom to think she's not part of me, but nobody's going to believe white if I put white. So I have to put black. But then when I put black, that means I'm denying. And so here I am at 18 years old, having this struggle, just trying to fill out a stupid piece of paperwork to register for classes. Like, why do they need to know what race I am? This is the first time I've had to think about this. And then after my mom leaves and this girl says to me, we have to have 10 of you, I begin to second guess myself. Am I here at this great institution because I'm one of the 10? Or am I here because I really earned my way here? And you would think, if I was thinking logically, with the 3.9 GPA and great SAT scores and the captain of 3 varsity teams, I earned my way, but I began to second guess myself. And then as I went out into the community, never forget this. I was walking to the store one day, and this car drove by. It was actually a Jeep, and they had the top down, and it was 2 white young men. They had a Villanova sticker on their car, and Villanova was about 10 minutes down the road, and they were booming rap music. And I remember as they went by, they screamed out of their car, "Nigger, get out of our neighborhood." And it was the first time I'd ever heard that word, especially referring to me, because in Europe, we just didn't use that language. And I remember feeling violated. And I couldn't even explain it because I didn't even understand what the term meant. But the way they said it, it was so clear that there was something wrong with me. And I wish I could say that was the only experience I had like that. Those kinds of experiences became kind of normal my first year of college. And then there were the black girls who told me I wasn't like them because I was from Europe. And so I didn't fit. I was not white enough and I was not black enough. I was too international. So a lot of the kids called me a foreigner, but I didn't feel foreign. And it just became a very confusing time for me. And by the end of my freshman year of college, I was ready to die. I didn't want to kill myself because I couldn't imagine shooting myself, and I couldn't imagine taking drugs. But if God had just let me disappear, I would have been perfectly happy, and I was ready to just disappear. By April, May of my freshman year, I had stopped eating. I had stopped doing laundry. I would go to class and come back and lay in my bed, and just my floor was a carpet of clothing. I would take it off and just lay it on the floor. I was so discouraged. And I had no one to talk to. Who do I go talk to? Who do I tell? I can't call my mom. How do I call my mom thousands of miles away and tell her, you know what, people here are racist? I didn't even know what racist was at the time. I just knew that nobody loved me. Nobody liked who I was. I was an outsider. And it was absolutely heartbreaking to me. And so I just continued to die on the inside. I was dying quickly. And then summer came, and I can't remember exactly why, but my parents called and said, we can't afford to bring you home this summer. I think they had to start paying Dutch taxes or something, and so they didn't have the money to bring me home. And so here I am breaking on the inside. All I want to do is come home. I want to leave this country. I hate it here. Nobody likes me here. I just want to see my mom, and I'm stuck. And I'm one of maybe 4 students stuck on campus for the summer. And they're all foster kids. They're all kids of divorced families. They're all broken. And then me. And we just were the rejects. I mean, I remember we lived in this dorm and we called ourselves the rejects. And we would work part days and then hide in our rooms. I mean, I remember not even turning the light on in my room. I would come home from work and just lay in my room in the dark. And one day after work, I decided to go walking, and I put my tennis shoes on and I just started walking. And I walked and walked, and after about 45 minutes of walking, I heard basketballs bouncing. And I followed the sound of the basketballs. I got so excited. Basketball. And there was this little bitty court right in the middle of a really small black community. It was the oddest thing because the college was in a very white community, but all the people who served in these big mansions were black. And this little tiny community had been formed probably generations before where all the servants lived. And they still lived there and would walk to these homes, serve as maids, as cooks. And there were all these black men playing basketball that day. And they actually had 9 guys, and they needed one more to play 5-on-5. And I had my shoes on. And I remember one of the guys called out and said, hey, big girl, come play ball with us. We need one more. And I was so excited to go play basketball. And so I went out and played with them that day. And I could speak the language of basketball. I didn't speak the language of the black people in that community. I didn't sound like them, but I could ball like them. And so I found myself for the first time in America finding a home, a place that I belonged. Now, it turns out that I may have played with Dr. Julius Erving a couple times without knowing it because I didn't grow up with the NBA, but he lived in the community. And I remember one day after we played, this woman came by in it was either a Mercedes or a BMW, and she said, is Jay here? Is Jay around? I turned to the guys, I'm like, who's Jay? And they all looked at me like I had lost my mind. And I said, who is Jay? And they're like, Dr. Julius Erving? I said, who is that? And they said, you know, the big guy who's been out here playing with us? And so I actually had the opportunity to play with Dr. J. I didn't know who he was. He was a really tall, amazing basketball player. But that court taught me so much about myself. And it became the place where I really found a new identity for myself. And the other thing it gave me was this sense of purpose again, because as I sat on the sidelines between games, I would listen to the stories of the young black men. It was all black men, no women. And their stories were all stories of brokenness. Every one of them. Not one of the boys had graduated from high school. Not one of the boys could read or write. Not one of them had dreams or aspirations beyond the age of 21. And I realized in that moment at 19 years old, I know what God created me to do. He made me black and white. He made me European and American. He made me an athlete and an academic for a reason. And I just need to own that and then give that to God and say, use me then to help these young men. And so that began my journey 23 years ago to really devote my heart and my passion to making sure that every child gets a great education. And at the time, I thought only black boys were not being educated. And I've realized in the last 23 years, zip code, race, language of origin absolutely drive education in this country. And it's been my mission, it is my mission, to make sure that those things don't determine what kind of an education young people get. And so that began this new journey for me at 19 years old. We didn't have an education department at Bryn Mawr, but I began to volunteer in schools, and I began to see that the schools where kids look like me were broken. They were broken. They had teachers who had no education. They had no supplies. My senior year, I volunteered in an elementary school in North Philadelphia where they literally did not have a computer. This was 1993. Not one computer in the entire building. Not one copy machine in the entire building. They had a mimeograph machine in 1993. And this is how teachers were expected to somehow educate their children. They didn't have a library in this building. Their playground was so broken and had so many dirty needles and broken bottles that children couldn't play outside. And I began to realize at 20, 21 years old that this was the greatest civil rights, social justice issue of modern day America. And it's been an amazing journey, a journey of seeing lots of brokenness in young people, but also believing that there is something greater that can happen. There is something beautiful that can happen. Watching young people who would tell me I'm not going anywhere. Now, 2 of my young people who were in my classroom, when I met them, had no intention of living beyond 21. They were broken young men. And today, both college graduates and doing amazing things. And so I believe as America, we need to decide. We've got to see the giftedness in each and every one of our children, just like my parents saw the giftedness in me. They sacrificed themselves to see this little orphan girl become great. I believe that's each of our obligation, to sacrifice ourselves to make sure that the least of these are taken care of. And so the last 23 years have not been easy. As a Black woman in education, particularly as I've moved up the ranks, it's not an easy place to be. It's not easy to call out what you see, to speak the truth. And there are times when people either don't understand or they don't want to. And they really don't want to serve all kids. But I have to believe that there's a greater calling on this nation, and there's a greater calling for me to lay aside the anger, to lay aside my own frustration, and to believe that through all of my trials and tribulations, there's a story to be told, and there are people to be inspired. And that I always tell folks, my brokenness becomes a bridge for others to walk on. And that's how I want to see my life, is through the brokenness and the not being Black enough sometimes and the not being white enough sometimes. And I still deal with that all the time. How can I allow my brokenness to be used by others to elevate them and to be an inspiration to them? And so I look at my past, my Blackness and my whiteness, my Europeanness and my Americanness, my athleticism and my academic past, and I think, how can I always use everything that I've experienced to make someone else's life better? And in that, it makes my own better. And so it's been an incredible gift. And I see God's hand in the whole thing from the very beginning. And if my mother ever sees this, my biological mother, she needs to know that she did a great thing to give me away. And my parents now, my adopted parents, are the most amazing people in the whole world. And I know they don't see themselves as special. But as I tell my story and I inspire thousands, they're the ones who made it possible for me to tell the story. They're the ones who made it possible for me to live the journey. And I thank my parents, I thank my family, my husband and my kids for giving me the opportunity to share the story and to be part of this journey. Because it's a journey we're all on together. We're all broken and we're all in need of grace and mercy. And I always want to be that hand of God's grace, reaching out to let every person, every young person, every adult person know they are special. They are a gift, that God has a plan for each one to do great things. Thank you.
I'm simply saying, what you wouldn't do to your own body, you should not take out on anyone else. And just imagine the degree of difficulty trying to rape or beat yourself. Well, now, this time was not meant to offend anybody, and I sure hope I didn't offend any of you. It's just my way of poetically expressing women are human too.
Let me tell you about Healing Grace. To me, Healing Grace is learning that for 48 years you've had a birth defect and you've been doing almost all the things you wanted to, if you will, to your heart's desire, and to learn that your heart, if you will, is broken and it needs to be fixed after 48 years. And Healing Grace comes in and says, I'm going to hold you for 48 years because I believe there's something greater that I need to have this heart fixed for. So now we're going to get it fixed so you can go to do greater things, whatever those things are. I'm trusting God for whatever the greater is, but I know that I have my heart fixed. The operation was supposed to take 4 to 6 hours. It took 2 hours and 45 minutes. They said that they had the paddles warming up to jumpstart my heart, and for some reason they had them close to the rib cage, and they hadn't even gotten to where they go clear. They hadn't even gotten to that part yet, and as the paddles were warming, my heart started pumping, and then it was like, oh my goodness, we need to hurry up and get this together. They said to me, you will be in the hospital for 7 days. I went home after 5. I got up and walked the first night, went to the bathroom on my own the very first night. I believe all of that was not because of anything I had done, but because of his healing grace, because of his new mercy every day. All that I've needed, his hand provided. I needed someone to see that I was having an issue. They found that issue and they fixed it. Today, it's 8 months after I've had the surgery. I have my little scar. It's what we call my badge of honor. It goes down to my rib cage. A lot of people call it a zipper. I don't like that name. I call it my badge of honor. But even with it, and it's still healing, that part is still healing. My heart is great. My heart is great. And some of the weight that I wanted to lose from all the walking that I was trying to do when this first started has happened. Let me tell you, I was wearing a size 20 before all of this hit. This is a 16. You better go, girl. And it's all because my metabolism is better since my heart got fixed. But it took, even then, all of that time, all those years, for me to be where I was then, to be where I am now. I feel like a new person. I feel as if the Lord has really given me a different path in terms of where he wants me to go, to share with people the life that I have lived and the life that I'm living now. I told you I would talk about my mom. My mom was wonderful. Jeanette Johnson was one of the greatest women on this earth. She was an educator. She worked for the Board of Education up until the time she lost her job. And even when I left home, and I need you to understand that when I left home, there were dire straits. But as I became an adult, married, having children, as her children started leaving the nest, the Lord blessed her as well, and she went back to working for the Board of Education. As a matter of fact, she ended up being the secretary to the school that I graduated high school from, the secretary to the principal of that school. And they loved her at the J. Graham Brown School in Louisville. She was an amazing lady, so sweet. She did not suffer fools. She had divorced my stepfather, and by that in itself, it was yes! She went on ahead and did her thing. My mom was diagnosed with colon cancer in early 1998 and died later that year. But she learned in the time as children started leaving, she learned in that time how to live her life, how to accept who she was, how to be the true mom role model. I look just like my mom. And in that I feel really blessed because I know that Jeanette legacy carries on. She was extremely gifted in song. I got my gift from my mom and her side of the family. I don't know my natural father, but I do know that where one place would have been empty, again, new mercy, God gives what we need. I moved here and found out that a guy wanted to be my dad. and has made me his daughter and cares for me as such. And so he calls my daughters and my sons his grandchildren. He calls my grandchildren his great-grandchildren. He loves my husband as his son. And he just, I could not ask for a better father had he actually been my natural dad. Jeanette made that possible in that she told me, you can be what you want to be. You can go where you want to go. You can do what you want to do. Just do it to the best of your ability. Even as she was going through what she went through, she tried very much to instill in us, be the very best. Not all of us listened, but most of us did. I know I did. She loved my husband as if she had bore him. I had to remind her every now and then, that's your son-in-law, I'm the daughter. You had me and not him. Because she treated him as if he was her son and I was the stepkid from outer space whenever we came together. That's how much she loved my man. Come on here. He's the in-law. No, he's the in-love. I love him. Okay. But she and he, they had such a wonderful relationship. And I believe had she known back then that there was something wrong with my heart, my mom would have gotten that truly fixed at that time. But even then, I think about it. My heart was broken when my mom passed away. And yet I lived through that. I lived through all these things. Why? Because he had such a destiny for me. He had such a trail for me to blaze. He wanted me to be able to even sit here and talk to you today about what's going on and what has happened in my life. Today, my life is full. I just recorded my 4th CD, gospel CD. I'm awaiting the birth of my 5th grandchild. I'm married to a really extraordinary guy. We will celebrate 30 years in November if the Lord says the same, and he's cute. I appreciate the fact that he has always been my greatest fan and my greatest supporter. Always has my back. The other thing is, when it comes to being in ministry, it's not easy being married to someone in ministry. And I know sometimes it takes a toll on him, but he has always stepped up to the plate. And even in his time of, I just can't deal with this right now, he has still dealt with it right now. So to him, I say, Ernest, I love you. You are the best thing other than God that ever happened to me. And so, as I heal, as I go about my life, as I make ready to do whatever it is next that God has for me, I know he's given me healing grace. He's done it in such a way that I've made new friends. He's allowed me to get rid of toxic relationships. He's allowed me to love on folk that I never would have thought I could love. He's opened doors for me that I've never even imagined were there. And I'm excited about my life. I'm excited about the future. I'm excited about my relationship with him and the healing grace that he continues to show to me every day. And I look forward to telling you all one day in part 2, later on down the line, how this part of my life has segued into something even greater. So I appreciate this time to share. Thank you for hearing my story. And the words of the song that I keep saying, great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness, morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me.
brought me out. It was your healing grace, without a doubt, that made my life what it is and what it's going to be. Your healing grace saved me. Your healing grace saved me. Your healing grace, unconditional love. It was your healing grace that you sent from above. When my heart was burdened down, you showered me down with your love. Your healing grace saved me. Your healing grace saved me. I have been through so many changes, struggles in my life that I thought I couldn't bear. But then your blessings through the storm have made me realize your love divine in your grace. Your healing grace saved me. Your healing grace brought me out. It was your healing grace, without a doubt, made my life what it is and what it's going to be. Oh, your healing grace save me. Your healing grace save me. Now I have been through so many changes, struggles in my life that I thought I couldn't bear. But then your blessings through the storm has made me realize your love divine. It was your grace saved me. It made me healing grace.
It helps a lot to have confidence in yourself, even when it doesn't look like you're confident. It helps to be able to speak a word of encouragement to me. It helps me to be able to say, Robin, you can get through this. Robin, it's going to be okay. Robin, look forward to what's going to happen next in life. Don't wallow in what's happening right now, because something along the line has to change.
Because I have to make up for what happened to me. Mm-hmm. I need to be perfect. Mm-hmm. And so it's made me good at what I do, but there's this other unhealthy side of trying to be perfect that's not good, overcompensating. And so now I've had to really think about, after going through counseling for the last 3 years, so what are the boundaries for me? And can I see myself as beautiful and whole in spite of what's happened to me in the past? And that's what I love sharing with girls, is that you don't have to let what's happened to you rule you or break you, but you have to talk about it.